The loud ring of Charlotte Mason's phone broke the stillness in her room. She hesitated for a moment before reaching out with a trembling hand. Her heart pounded when she saw the name on the screen. Lillian, her younger sister. Taking a deep breath, Charlotte swiped to answer. "Liv, you won't believe it." Lillian's excited voice shouted through the phone. "He said yes, we're getting married." Charlotte forced a smile, though Lillian couldn't see her. "That's wonderful, Soph. I'm so happy for you." Her words felt fake, almost like they were practiced. As Lillian's voice bubbled on about wedding dresses, flowers, and venues, Charlotte let the phone slip away from her ear for a moment. Her gaze fell on the dresser, where the small stick that had changed her life sat, a positive pregnancy test. 2 weeks. That's how long it had been since Charlotte discovered she was pregnant. 2 weeks since her world turned upside down. And the father? Lysander Hawthorne, the man who had disappeared from her life 3 months ago without an explanation. The same Lysander who was now her sister's fiancé's brother. "Liv, are you still there?" Lillian's voice brought her back to the moment. "Yes, I'm here," Charlotte said, forcing her voice to sound steady. "Sorry, just a little tired." "When's the big day?" "In 6 weeks." Lillian's voice bubbled with excitement. "I know it's short notice, but we want something small and special, just family and close friends. You'll help me with everything, won't you?" Charlotte's stomach sank. 6 weeks. She quickly did the math in her head. By then, she would be almost 4 months pregnant. Could she hide it for that long? Could she keep this secret while helping her sister with wedding plans? She had no idea how she would manage. "Of course, Soph. I'll be there for whatever you need." Charlotte replied automatically, even as her mind raced with doubts. After her hanging up, Charlotte dropped the phone onto the bed and sat down beside it. Her hands rested instinctively on her still flat belly. How could she face Lysander again? How could she keep this secret from her family, especially Lillian? Closing her eyes, Charlotte's thoughts drifted back to the last time she saw Lysander. It had been a magical evening in Chicago, where she worked as an editor for a top fashion magazine. Lysander, a wealthy investor visiting the city, had asked her to dinner after a chance meeting at a cafe. What started as one night turned into 3 months of passionate romance. Charlotte had believed she was falling in love, only to have him vanish without a word. No calls, no messages. It was like Lysander had disappeared off the face of the earth. And now, he was back. Not as her lover, but as her sister's brother-in-law-to-be. A notification buzzed on her phone, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her mom. "Darling, come home as soon as you can. We have a wedding to plan." Charlotte sighed, knowing she had no choice. She would have to return to Quincy, Massachusetts, her quiet hometown outside Boston. It felt like a world away from the bustling streets of Chicago, but going back meant more than just helping with wedding plans. It meant facing her family and Lysander, the man who didn't know she was carrying his child. Charlotte stood up, her determination growing. She began packing her suitcase, folding clothes mechanically as her mind ran through the possibilities. Should she tell Lysander the truth? Should she keep the secret? Could she even look him in the eye without falling apart? As she zipped up the suitcase, she glanced out the window at Chicago's towering skyline. The city had been her refuge, her escape from the past. But now she was heading back to the place where it all began. "Maybe this is the start of something new," she whispered, trying to find a shred of hope in the chaos. She booked a flight to Boston and closed the door to her apartment, a sense of finality settling over her. Chicago had been her home for years, but now she was leaving, unsure of what awaited her back in Quincy. The next morning, as her plane landed at Boston's Logan International Airport, Charlotte was greeted by the humid air of the East Coast. The bustling terminal was filled with travelers rushing to their destinations, families reuniting with hugs and laughter. Charlotte couldn't help but feel a pang of envy as she watched their joyful faces. Liv, over here. Lillian's cheerful voice rang out above the crowd. Charlotte turned to see her younger sister waving excitedly, her radiant smile lighting up the space. Beside her, with an arm draped casually over her shoulder, stood him, Lysander Hawthorne. Charlotte froze, her heart pounding as she took in his familiar features. He looked even more handsome than she remembered. His dark hair was slightly tousled, iliac, his piercing blue eyes as striking as ever, but his expression was unreadable. Was it surprise? Guilt? Or was she imagining it? Hi, guys, Charlotte managed to say, forcing a smile as she approached. Lillian threw her arms around Charlotte in a tight hug. I'm so glad you're here. I can't wait to start planning everything, she gushed. Charlotte hugged her back, trying to ignore the tension she felt with Lysander standing so close. When she pulled away, her eyes met his. Charlotte, he said in a low voice that sent shivers down her spine. It's good to see you again. His tone was formal, as though the 3 months they had spent together had never happened. Charlotte swallowed hard, determined to stay composed. Likewise, Lysander, she replied, proud of how steady her voice sounded. Congratulations on your engagement. For a brief moment, a flicker of something crossed Lysander's face. Regret? Confusion? But it was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Thank you, he said simply, tightening his arm around Lillian's shoulders. The drive to their parents' house was filled with Lillian's excited chatter about wedding plans. Charlotte nodded along and asked questions at the right moments, but her mind was elsewhere. How could she navigate this impossible situation? As the car pulled into the familiar driveway, Charlotte felt a mix of emotions. The house hadn't changed. The 2-story Victorian home with its wraparound porch and colorful garden was exactly as she remembered it. Her parents, Grace Thompson and Robert Mason, were standing on the porch, smiling and waving. Her mom rushed down the steps to greet her. My dear, it's so nice to have you back, Grace Thompson said, wrapping Charlotte in a warm hug. She pulled back, studying Charlotte's face with a concerned look. You look a little pale. Are you feeling all right? I'm fine, Mom, Charlotte replied quickly, just tired from the trip. But as she followed her family inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that her mother's sharp eyes had noticed something. Charlotte sat quietly, praying her mom wouldn't notice anything. Suddenly, her dad, Robert, came into the room with a big smile. He walked over to Charlotte and hugged her warmly. Welcome back, darling. We've missed you so much, he said. Everyone in the family started gathering in the living room. Lillian, Charlotte's sister, was the center of attention. She was so excited and talked non-stop about her upcoming wedding. Charlotte sat silently, feeling the heavy weight of a secret she couldn't share. Her eyes wandered to Lysander, Lillian's fiancé. He was chatting easily with their parents, looking relaxed and comfortable, like he had always been part of the family. But Charlotte knew better. She wondered how he could act so normal after everything that had happened between them. Charlotte, would you like some tea? Her mom, Grace Thompson, asked gently. You look like you need it. Yes, please, Charlotte replied, glad for a reason to leave the room. She followed her mom to the kitchen, hoping it would help her get away from Lysander's intense stare. Once they were in the kitchen, Grace Thompson turned to Charlotte with a worried look. Are you okay, darling? You seem quiet. Is something bothering you? She asked. Charlotte hesitated. She thought about telling her mom everything, about her trip to Chicago, about Lysander, and about the baby she was carrying. But her throat tightened, and she couldn't find the words. How could she share such big news when her sister's wedding was so close? It didn't feel right. I'm just tired from work, Mom, Charlotte lied. She hated lying to her mom, but she felt trapped. I'll be fine, I promise. Grace Thompson studied her daughter's face carefully for a moment, then sighed. You know you can tell me anything, right? No matter what it is, I'll always be here for you. I know, Mom. Thank you, Charlotte said softly, feeling guilty. When they returned to the living room with cups of tea, Charlotte noticed Lysander looking at her again. His gaze was intense, and it made her feel uneasy. Their eyes met for just a second, and Charlotte thought she saw something in his expression. Regret? Sadness? Before she could figure it out, he quickly looked away. Sitting there, surrounded by her family, Charlotte felt lonelier than ever. Everyone seemed so happy, but she was carrying a secret she couldn't share. She glanced at Lillian, who was smiling and laughing, completely unaware of what was going on. Charlotte made a silent promise to herself and to the baby growing inside her. She would find a way to handle this, no matter how hard it got. The next morning, Charlotte woke up in her old bedroom. The sunlight peeked through the curtains, making patterns on the wall. For a moment, she wished that everything that had happened over the last few months was just a bad dream. But then she felt the familiar wave of nausea and had to rush to the bathroom. It was a harsh reminder that this was all very real. After pulling herself together, Charlotte went downstairs. The smell of pancakes filled the air, and she found her mom cooking in the kitchen. "Good morning, darling. Did you sleep well?" Grace Thompson asked cheerfully. "Yes, thank you," Charlotte said, forcing a smile. "Where's everyone?" "Your dad went out for a run and Lillian went to meet the florist," Grace Thompson replied. Then she paused, frowning slightly. "Lysander left early this morning, but he didn't say where he was going." Charlotte felt a little curious about where Lysander might have gone so early, but she quickly reminded herself that it wasn't her business anymore. "Could you do me a favor, dear?" Grace Thompson asked, turning back to the stove. "We're out of eggs. Could you run to Mr. Thompson's grocery store and grab some? It's just across the street." "Of course, Mom," Charlotte replied. She was happy for an excuse to get out of the house for a little while. As she stepped outside, the cool morning air felt refreshing. She took a deep breath, hoping it would help her clear her mind. The small town looked just as it had when she was a kid, with the same friendly neighbors and familiar streets. When Charlotte walked into Mr. Thompson's store, the little bell above the door jingled. Mr. Thompson, an elderly man with kind eyes, looked up from behind the counter. His hair was completely white now, but his warm smile hadn't changed. "Charlotte Mason, it's so good to see you back in town," he exclaimed. "I hear your sister is getting married. Congratulations to your family." Charlotte smiled politely. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. It's nice to be back," she said. As she walked to the dairy aisle to grab eggs, she suddenly heard a voice that made her freeze. It was Lysander. "I can't do this, Julian Foster. It's too complicated," he said. "You have to tell the truth," another voice replied urgently. It was Julian Foster, Lysander's friend. "Before it's too late." "And risk losing everything?" "I can't," Lysander said firmly. Charlotte's heart pounded in her chest. What truth was Lysander hiding? She wanted to know more, but knew it wasn't right to eavesdrop. Just then, Mr. Thompson appeared nearby. "Did you find what you were looking for, dear?" he asked kindly. Startled, Charlotte quickly grabbed a carton of eggs. "Yes, thank you," she said, trying to sound normal. She paid for the eggs and left the store in a hurry. Her mind was racing. What could Lysander be hiding? Back at home, Charlotte handed the eggs to her mom and mumbled something about needing to make a work call. She went up to her room, closing the door behind her. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she replayed the conversation she had overheard. What was Lysander keeping from everyone? And how would it affect Lillian and her baby? Charlotte felt overwhelmed. A soft knock on the door startled her. "Charlotte? Can I come in?" It was Lillian. Charlotte quickly wiped her face and composed herself. "Sure, come in," she said. Lillian walked in, looking radiant and happy. "I need your opinion on something," she said, sitting down on the bed. "What do you think about lavender for the bridesmaids' dresses?" Charlotte forced a smile. "I think it's a beautiful color," she replied. Lillian tilted her head, studying Charlotte's face. "Are you okay? You look like you're worried about something," she said gently. Lillian didn't seem completely convinced, but she smiled anyway. Well, don't overwork yourself, okay? I need my sister and my baby's godmother to be in top shape for the big day. When Lillian left, Charlotte felt even more alone. She knew she couldn't keep her secret forever, but every time she thought about telling the truth, she felt frozen with fear. That afternoon, the family had lunch together in the garden. Charlotte watched Lysander closely. To everyone else, he seemed perfect, charming, kind, and attentive. But Charlotte noticed little things. A worried look here, a moment of hesitation there. When their eyes met across the table, she saw guilt in his expression, mixed with fear. "Charlotte, you haven't eaten much," Grace Thompson said, looking concerned. "Are you feeling okay?" All eyes turned to Charlotte, including Lysander's. She felt panic rising inside her. She wasn't ready to tell everyone her secret, but she blurted out, I need to tell you something." The table went silent. Charlotte felt Lysander's intense gaze on her, as if he already knew what she might say. She took a deep breath, but before she could continue, Lillian's phone rang. "Oh, it's the florist," Lillian said, standing up quickly. "I have to take this." The moment passed. Charlotte sighed, feeling relieved and frustrated at the same time. "I just wanted to say I've been thinking about moving back to Quincy," she said instead. Her parents smiled warmly, clearly happy with the idea. But Lysander's gaze remained fixed on her, his expression unreadable. As the day went on, Charlotte felt more and more trapped by her secret. She knew she couldn't avoid the truth forever, but with each passing moment, it felt harder to find the right time to speak up. Looking at Lillian's joyful smile and Lysander's nervous glances, Charlotte wondered how long she could keep this up before everything came crashing down. Charlotte felt like she was sinking deeper and deeper into a hole made of secrets and lies. She knew that one day the truth would come out, and when it did, everything would change forever. The next week was super busy with wedding stuff. Charlotte's sister, Lillian, was getting married, and Charlotte was running around doing all sorts of things, trying on dresses, picking flowers, and more. She tried to keep herself busy so she wouldn't think too much about her big, scary secret. One afternoon, Charlotte was at a fancy store with Lillian. They were looking at wedding invitations. The store had so many pretty papers with gold and silver designs. "What do you think of this one, Liv?" Lillian asked, holding up a cream-colored card with shiny gold edges. Charlotte forced a smile. "It's nice. It suits you." But Lillian frowned and stared at her. "Okay, what's going on with you? You've been acting weird." "What do you mean?" Charlotte asked, pretending to look at more invitations. "Don't play dumb," Lillian said. "You've been quiet and distracted. You always have opinions about everything, but now you barely say anything. That's not like you, Liv." Charlotte felt a lump in her throat. Lillian knew her too well to be tricked. "I just have a lot on my mind," Charlotte muttered, not meeting Lillian's eyes. Lillian put down the invitation and held Charlotte's hands. "Is it about a boy? Did something happen in Chicago?" she asked. Lillian's worried face almost made Charlotte cry. She thought about telling her everything right there, but before she could speak, the store door opened. Lysander, Lillian's fiancé, walked in with Julian Foster, his best friend. "Oh, you're here," Lillian said, smiling at Lysander. "Are you here to help with the invitations?" Lysander smiled but glanced quickly at Charlotte. Um, Actually, I came to pick you up for lunch. Remember, we have an appointment with a wedding planner?" Lillian gasped. "Oh no, I forgot. Liv, can you stay here? I'll be back soon." Charlotte nodded, feeling her stomach twist. She didn't want to be left alone with Julian Foster. She couldn't forget what she had overheard him and Lysander talking about in the grocery store. After Lillian and Lysander left, Julian Foster looked at Charlotte. "How are you holding up with all this wedding craziness?" "Everything's fine," Charlotte said quickly. "Lillian seems happy." Julian Foster studied her face. "Sometimes things aren't what they seem," he said. Charlotte froze. "What do you mean?" Julian Foster sighed and ran his hand through his hair. Look, Charlotte, I don't know you very well, but I feel like I should tell you something. Before he could finish, Charlotte felt dizzy. The room spun around her. I need air, she said, rushing outside. Julian Foster followed her, looking worried. Are you okay? Charlotte leaned against a wall, breathing deeply. She felt a little better, but was still dizzy. Let's sit down, Julian Foster said, guiding her to a bench. When they sat, Julian Foster looked at her kindly. How long have you known? He asked softly. Known what? Charlotte asked, confused. The pregnancy, Julian Foster said gently. How long have you known you're having a baby? Charlotte's mouth fell open. How did he know? She hadn't told anyone. How? How did you know? Julian Foster smiled sadly. My sister was pregnant last year. I saw the signs. Is the father Lysander? Tears filled Charlotte's eyes. She nodded. Julian Foster sighed deeply. I knew something was off. Alex has been acting different since he came back from Chicago. You knew about us? Charlotte asked. Not exactly, Julian Foster said, but I could tell something had changed. When I saw you two together here, I started to put the pieces together. Charlotte wiped her tears. What should I do? You need to tell him, Julian Foster said, and tell your family. Keeping this a secret will only make things worse. Charlotte nodded. She knew Julian Foster was right. What if I just left, went back to Chicago and never told anyone? Julian Foster shook his head. You can't do that. You deserve better, and so does your baby. Hearing the word baby made it all feel real to Charlotte. She took a deep breath. You're right. I have to tell the truth. Julian Foster smiled. You're not alone. I'll help you. Just then, Lillian and Lysander came back, laughing. Charlotte's heart raced. It's time, Julian Foster whispered. Charlotte took a deep breath and walked toward them. Her heart pounded as she said, We need to talk. All of us. Lillian looked confused. What's wrong, Liv? Lysander frowned. Maybe we should go somewhere private? They walked to a quiet park. Under a big tree, Charlotte turned to them, her hands shaking. Lillian, Alex, there's something I need to say, she began. Lillian looked worried. You're scaring me. What is it? I'm pregnant, Charlotte said, her voice trembling. Lillian's face lit up. That's great news, but who's the father? Charlotte looked at Lysander. Lillian followed her gaze and her face fell. No, Lillian whispered. It can't be. Lysander stepped forward. Lillian, I can explain. Lillian stared at them, tears filling her eyes. Both of you? How? When? It happened in Chicago, Charlotte said quickly, before you and Alex met. Lillian stepped back as if she'd been hit. Why didn't you tell me? I was scared, Lysander said. I'm so sorry, Lillian, Charlotte cried. I never wanted to hurt you. Lillian shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You both lied to me. Charlotte reached out. I thought I could handle it, but I was wrong. Lillian pulled away from Julian Foster, her face red with tears. She wiped them angrily and said, I'll handle this alone. Liv, you don't just handle something like this. It's a baby. My fiancé is having a baby, Julian Foster said. Ex-fiancé, Julian Foster muttered, but everyone heard him. Lysander turned to Lillian, his eyes begging. Lillian, please, can we talk about this? I love you. You know I do. But Lillian shook her head, her voice trembling with anger. Love? You call this love? Lying to me? Getting my sister pregnant? No, Lysander, that's not love. She turned to Charlotte, her eyes full of hurt. And you, my own sister, how could you? Charlotte's face was wet with tears. Soph, I swear I didn't know. By the time I found out, it was too late. Lillian laughed, but it wasn't happy. It was bitter. Too late, Liv? You had weeks. Weeks to tell me the truth. Weeks to stop this from going so far. I know, Charlotte sobbed. I was scared and confused. I'm sorry. But Lillian was already walking away. I need to be alone. Don't follow me. None of you. She turned and ran, leaving the others standing under the big oak tree, her words hanging heavily in the air. Lysander took a step to follow her, but Julian Foster grabbed his shoulder firmly. Let her go, Alex. She needs space right now. Charlotte sank to the ground, her legs unable to hold her up. She hugged her knees and cried openly. Lysander knelt beside her, unsure. Liv, I'm so sorry. For everything. Charlotte looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. She saw how guilty he looked. What are we going to do now, Alex? I don't know, Lysander said softly, but we'll figure it out together, okay? You're not alone. Um, Julian Foster watched them, feeling both sorry for them and worried. You two need to talk, he said gently. Sentently, there's a lot to figure out. But first, we all need some time to think. Charlotte nodded, wiping her tears. Julian Foster was right. There was so much to discuss, so many decisions to make, but for now, under the oak tree in Marymount Park, with Lillian's distant sobs still in her ears, all Charlotte could do was breathe and try to be ready for what would come next. The truth was finally out, and now they had to face the consequences. Their future, which once seemed so clear, was now blurry and unsure. But one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same. The hours after what happened in the park passed in a blur for Charlotte. She barely remembered how she got home. Julian Foster had walked her back, while Lysander went to find Lillian. The look of shock and disappointment on her parents' faces when she finally told them the truth would stay in her mind forever. Now, sitting on the porch of her childhood home, Charlotte watched the sun set. The sky turned orange and pink, beautiful and peaceful, so different from how she felt inside. The creak of the front door made her turn. Her mother, Grace Thompson, stepped outside, holding 2 cups of tea. I thought you might like this, Grace Thompson said softly, handing Charlotte a cup. Charlotte took it with a small smile. Thanks, Mom. Grace Thompson sat down beside her, and for a while they were both quiet, watching the twilight. Lillian's not back yet, Charlotte finally said, her voice barely a whisper. Grace Thompson shook her head. No, Lysander called earlier. He found her at a friend's house. She needs some time. Charlotte felt her eyes fill with tears again. I've ruined everything, haven't I? I've destroyed my sister's happiness. Grace Thompson sighed and put an arm around her. Oh, darling, life is never that simple. Yes, mistakes were made, but it's not all your fault. But if I had told you sooner, Charlotte started, but Grace Thompson gently stopped her. What if Lysander had been honest from the start? What if none of this had happened? We can't change the past, Liv. We can only decide what to do with the present and the future. Charlotte nodded slowly, thinking about her mother's words. How is Dad handling all this? Grace Thompson smiled sadly. You know your father. He's processing it in his own way. Give him time. He loves you and Lillian more than anything. That won't change. They sat quietly again as the sky grew darker. What about the baby? Grace Thompson asked softly, her hand resting on Charlotte's still flat belly. Charlotte placed her hand over her mother's. A wave of emotion swept over her. I'm going to keep him. No matter what happens with Lysander or Lillian, this baby is innocent in all of this. Grace Thompson squeezed Charlotte's hand. And you won't be alone. Whatever happens, we'll be here for you. The tears Charlotte had been holding back finally spilled over. She leaned into her mother's arms, sobbing. Thank you, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you. As they hugged, the sound of footsteps made them both look up. Lysander was standing at the bottom of the steps, looking tired and sad. Charlotte straightened up, wiping her tears. Alex, where's Lillian? Lysander climbed the steps slowly, as if every step hurt. She's staying at a friend's house for now. She needs space. Grace Thompson stood up, looking at both of them. You two need to talk. I'll be inside if you need me. When Grace Thompson left, Lysander sat in her chair. For a while, they didn't say anything. The silence was heavy. How is she? Charlotte finally asked, her voice very soft. Confused, angry, every emotion you can think of, Lysander said, running a hand over his face. He looked older than his age. Charlotte nodded, the guilt pressing on her chest. I'm so sorry, Alex, for everything. No, Liv, I'm the one who's sorry. I should have been honest, with Lillian, with you, with everyone. What do we do now? Charlotte asked, her hand resting on her belly. Lysander noticed the movement, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and wonder. I don't know, but I want to be part of this baby's life. If you'll let me. Charlotte felt relief. Despite everything, knowing she wouldn't be alone helped. And Lillian? She asked, her voice trembling. Lysander shook his head sadly. She made it clear, the engagement is over. I can't blame her. I betrayed her trust. Charlotte's tears returned. I never wanted this, Alex. I never wanted to hurt her. I know, he said quietly. None of us did. But here we are. They sat in silence, their choices and the weight of the situation hanging between them. We'll figure this out, Lysander finally said, reaching for her hand. Step by step. It won't be easy, but we're in this together now. Charlotte nodded, holding his hand tightly. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared from the horizon, they faced the uncertain future together. Charlotte felt a small spark of hope flicker in her chest. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. It was full of challenges, difficult choices, and hearts that needed mending. But for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely lost. The future wasn't clear, and she had no guarantees about what lay ahead, but at least now she wouldn't have to face it all alone. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and changes, not just for Charlotte, but for everyone around her. She was almost 4 months pregnant now, and her small belly was beginning to show, a constant reminder of everything that had happened. It was hard for her to avoid the consequences of her actions when the evidence was with her every moment of the day. One sunny Saturday morning, Charlotte found herself in the back garden of her parents' house. She was tending to the flowers her mother loved so much. The simple, repetitive task of pulling weeds and watering the plants helped her calm her mind. For a little while, she could forget the tension that still hung over her family like a dark cloud. Be careful not to overdo it, a familiar voice said behind her. Startled, Charlotte turned to see Julian Foster walking toward her. He was carrying a tray with glasses of lemonade and a small plate of cookies. Over the past few weeks, Julian Foster had become an unexpected but much appreciated source of support for both her and Lillian. Thanks, Charlotte said, smiling as she pulled off her gardening gloves and accepted the glass he offered her. She took a sip, letting the cool drink soothe her dry throat. Julian Foster settled onto the garden bench nearby and looked at her with concern. How are you doing? He asked gently. Charlotte hesitated for a moment before answering. I'm doing okay, she said softly. Some days are harder than others, but I'm trying. Julian Foster nodded, his expression thoughtful. Lillian's doing okay too, he said after a moment. One day at a time. She's been through a lot, but I think she's ready to take a step forward. Charlotte's heart jumped. She hadn't spoken to Lillian in weeks, not since everything had come out into the open. Lillian had refused to talk to her or Lysander, choosing instead to communicate only through their parents or Julian Foster. Did she say that? Charlotte asked, her voice filled with cautious hope. Julian Foster nodded. She told me she might be ready to meet with you. Nothing big or heavy, just coffee. But it's a start. Tears welled up in Charlotte's eyes. She hadn't expected Lillian to forgive her, at least not so soon. But the thought of even a small chance to fix things was more than she had dared to hope for. Thank you, Julian Foster, she said quietly, for being there for her, for me, for everything. I know it can't be easy, especially considering your friendship with Alex. Julian Foster sighed. It hasn't been easy for anyone, he admitted. But sometimes the hardest situations show us how strong we really are. Lillian's stronger than I ever realized. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The soft buzz of bees flitted through the garden, mixing with the distant hum of a lawnmower from a neighbor's yard. The peace was broken by the sound of the front doorbell ringing. That must be Alex, Julian Foster said, getting to his feet. He mentioned he'd stop by to discuss some plans. Charlotte nodded, feeling a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Since the truth had come out, she and Lysander had been forced to have several long, difficult conversations about their future, the baby, and what it all meant for them as individuals and as a possible family. A few moments later, Lysander appeared in the garden. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept well in days, but his posture was steady and his expression was determined. He gave Julian Foster a brief nod before turning his attention to Charlotte. "How are you feeling today?" Lysander asked. His eyes briefly flickered to her small baby bump. "I'm okay," Charlotte replied, her voice quiet. "The morning sickness is finally going away." Julian Foster looked between the two of them, clearly sensing the tension. He picked up the tray he'd brought out earlier. "I'll leave you two to talk," he said. "I'll be inside if you need anything." As soon as Julian Foster was gone, Lysander sat down on the bench beside Charlotte. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, watching the flowers sway gently in the breeze. "I've been thinking a lot," Lysander said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, serious. "About us. About the baby. About everything." Charlotte felt her heart race as she waited for him to continue. "I want to be a part of this," he said, looking her directly in the eyes. "Completely. Not just as someone who's there on weekends or sends a check every month. I want to be involved every step of the way." Charlotte felt a mixture of relief and worry. "Alex, that means a lot to me," she said honestly. "But what about Lillian and her life here in Quincy?" Lysander let out a deep sigh, leaning back against the bench. "Lillian has made it clear that there's no future for us as a couple," he said. "And as for Quincy, maybe it's time for a fresh start for all of us." Charlotte blinked in surprise. "A fresh start?" she repeated. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we could leave," Lysander said, his tone soft but firm. "Move somewhere new, start over, without all the judgment and the painful memories." The idea scared Charlotte. Leaving Quincy would mean leaving her family, her home, everything she had ever known. But at the same time, the thought of starting fresh somewhere far away from all the gossip and stares was tempting. "I don't know, Alex," she said hesitantly. "It's a big decision. And my family?" "I know," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to decide right now. Just think about it." Before Charlotte could respond, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. Both of them looked up to see Lillian standing at the edge of the garden. Her expression was guarded, her eyes flickering between Charlotte and Lysander. "Soph?" Charlotte whispered, standing up quickly. Lillian raised a hand to stop her. "No," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I just came to say I'm ready to talk, but not now. Not with both of you here." Lysander stood, clearly uncomfortable. "I should go," he muttered. Lillian nodded stiffly, avoiding looking directly at him. As Lysander walked past her, she spoke again, her voice barely audible. "Take care of her and the baby." Lysander stopped, surprised. He turned to look at Charlotte, then at Lillian, before giving a solemn nod and walking away. Now it was just the two sisters. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Lillian broke the silence. "Tomorrow," she said, "at the cafe around the corner, 10 o'clock. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Charlotte standing alone in the garden. Charlotte's heart felt torn. On one hand, she wanted so desperately to make things right with her sister. On the other hand, Lysander's idea of a new beginning was playing on her mind. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden, Charlotte realized she was at a crossroads. Lillian finally looked at her sister, her eyes shiny with tears she was trying to hold back. "But I'm your sister, Liv, your best friend. How could you keep such a big secret from me?" "I know," Charlotte cried. "I know, and I feel sorry about it every single day. I never wanted this to happen." Lillian took a deep breath to calm herself. "Do you love him?" Charlotte looked surprised. She didn't answer right away, thinking hard. I don't know. It all happened so fast, and now, with the baby, everything is so messy." Lillian nodded slowly. "Does he want to help with the baby?" "Yes," Charlotte said. He even suggested we leave this place and start over somewhere else. Lillian's eyes grew wide. You're leaving? Charlotte shook her head quickly. No, I mean, I don't know yet. It's just an idea. I haven't decided anything. The room grew quiet again. Both sisters sat there, lost in their own thoughts. You know, Lillian finally said, her voice softer this time. When we were little, I always thought that one day we'd both have kids at the same time. Our kids would grow up together, just like us. Charlotte's heart hurt hearing those words. Soph? No, Lillian said gently, stopping her. Let me finish. I'm really hurt, Liv. It hurts so much, and it's going to take a long time for me to feel okay again. She paused, breathing in deeply. But you're my sister, and this baby is my nephew or niece. I can't just ignore that. Charlotte started crying harder, tears running down her cheeks. What are you saying? Lillian reached out and touched Charlotte's hand softly. I'm saying that even though it's really hard, I want to try. I want to be part of the baby's life, and I want my sister back. Charlotte grabbed Lillian's hand, holding it tightly as tears kept falling. I miss you, Soph. I miss you so much. The two sisters looked at each other. They could see all the love they shared, the years of being best friends, and the pain between them now. It's going to take time, Lillian said quietly. It won't be easy. But we're family, and family sticks together. In that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't total forgiveness, and it wasn't forgetting everything that had happened, but it was a start, a chance to fix things, a chance to heal. When they left the cafe an hour later, the sun was shining brightly like it was showing them a little bit of hope. Charlotte got home feeling very tired, but her heart felt a bit lighter. Lysander was waiting for her on the balcony. His face looked worried. How did it go? He asked as soon as he saw her. Charlotte gave him a small smile. It's a start. She sat next to him and told him everything about her talk with Lillian. When she was done, Lysander took her hand. What about what we talked about yesterday? About leaving this place and starting fresh somewhere else? Charlotte looked around. She saw the street she grew up on, the house full of memories, the places that felt like home. Then she looked at Lysander, at the man who represented a future full of possibilities. I think, she said slowly, that to really start over, we need to stay right here. Lysander looked surprised. You want to stay? Charlotte nodded. I want to face this. I want to fix what's broken. I want our baby to know their family, all of it. It won't be easy, but it's worth a try, Lysander finished her sentence, a small smile growing on his face. At that moment, sitting on the balcony of her childhood home, Charlotte felt a calm she hadn't felt in a long time. The future was still unclear, with lots of hard times ahead, but now she knew she wouldn't have to face it alone. As the sun set, painting the sky in soft orange and pink colors, Charlotte placed her hand on her belly. She felt a tiny movement from the baby inside her. It was the end of one chapter in her life, but also the beginning of something new, something beautiful and unexpected. And so, holding Lysander's warm hand and thinking about the promise of a better tomorrow, Charlotte finally allowed herself to hope. Life wouldn't be perfect, but it would be theirs. And that, she realized, was more than enough. Thank you for watching. If you liked this story and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. That way you won't miss any new videos. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share what you think in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on our channel. We'll see you in the next story.